All right. So, one moment while I've got two monitors here, so I'll be queuing up content. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't see my presentation view, right? You just see my PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, we can see, we can see.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, I'm Ben Kreimer. These days I wear a lot of hats. I do a lot of work in the emerging media arts, but I also have, over the past few years, done a lot of work in the journalism, sort of emerging media journalism space. So I'm independent. I've really focused on doing work with emerging media technologies because I'm interested in how these new technologies that sort of are presented as, I don't know, having or holding a lot of promise, how they are sort of actually used in the real world in the context of storytelling and journalism, in the act of communicating information and fact gathering, which seems ever more important these days. So, and I have an interest in these technologies because in many cases they are, well, because they're emerging, they're young, and so they're a bit finicky, they're a bit difficult to work with. And so there's a lot of questions always about, how do you use them? How do you bring them together? So if we're talking, say, how do we make virtual reality content using a drone? What does that mean? And it can mean different things. And I like to figure out what those different approaches are and how technologies can be used together and in isolation for storytelling. But really, as always, the story comes first. So I really try to avoid sort of picking a technology and finding a problem for it. And instead, I prefer to think about having a tool set that can be applied in various contexts for various stories. And so usually what happens is, the way that I work is, I work as a consultant, and people come to me with a project or a story idea. And I then say, well, why don't we try this tool or that tool or these tools together? And so there's a lot of interdisciplinary work. And there's also a lot of, really, it tends to be, sort of frugal innovation. We're trying to do things on the cheap because we're trying to work quickly. And a lot of times in the context of journalism, but also the other projects that I work with, we don't have massive budgets. And we also don't sort of, it's kind of an experimental process. And so we're trying to sort of figure out quickly and cheaply what works and what doesn't, and coming up with a product in the end. So applying this kind of process and this kind of thinking, which really, I suppose, although this presentation is about virtual reality and photogrammetry and immersive media, the one element that I really want to convey is that there's a process involved, and that process, when it comes to working with these emerging media platforms, tends to be really iterative and experimental, and I'll show that. And a lot of that work that I have done using that process has been in the context of various organizations, from academic to media houses, wildlife conservation in East Africa. Yeah, so I've done a lot of work around the world applying these emerging media tools. And then in 2019, I was recognized by Forbes in their 30 under 30 for this work that I've been doing around the world. So to jump into what is virtual reality, it's definitely not a new concept, because really there's been, going back to the 1850s with the stereograph or the stereo viewer, there's been this interest in sort of 3D visual communication. So back then, I mean, we're talking over the centuries basically. So VR as a concept is not new. It's taken different forms based on the technology available in the day. And so the stereograph was a photograph that basically was in stereo. It was in 3D. So when you looked at it in your viewer, it would appear in 3D. I mean, what else is VR other than that, along with some technology and the ability to move around perhaps. But you know, early VR or early 3D image viewing, there's a lot of similarities. And you know, this technology of the day was taken around the world. This was a slightly uncommon perhaps view of the Taj Mahal in Agra, but this was captured in 1903. So, and this quote I really like because when I read it, I thought, you know, you could take out the word stereoscope and you could replace it with virtual reality, and you know, somebody could be saying the same quote, but instead of stereoscope, they're talking about VR. And so I like to show this sort of historical perspective and what has happened in the past, just to show that what we're doing today really, it has precedence. It's, you know, people have been interested in these concepts of three-dimensional storytelling and three-dimensional visual storytelling for centuries, well over 100 years. And so even in the design of some of the hardware that we have today, this is on the, you know, on the right, we have our stereoscope, our stereo viewer, and then we have the Eden Labs Snacker, which is, it's kind of an unusual VR headset designed for sort of quick consumption of VR content without a head strap. And so I thought the resemblance is kind of interesting here. But you know, here's sort of your VR headset, your 3D stereograph of today. And certainly a lot has changed, but the main ideas remain the same. It's just that it's kind of been wrapped in a black box in some ways, literally. But what's worth pointing out here is really what's on the inside of the headset. So, you know, what is VR? Well, VR is really screens and sensors. And so if you look at the headset, the dimples that are around the goggles allow for positional tracking, which is made possible, in this case with the HTC Vive, by the Lighthouse black boxes that you also can see here. And so VR really is about sort of the next level of stereograph, where not only can you see a three-dimensional image, but you can actually move around sort of inside of that image. And that's made possible with this positional tracking technology that's built into these headsets. Not all, but most VR headsets these days are built for positional tracking. And so when you break down the headset, really what you're left with in this case is the plastic pieces and the hardware components, which basically amount to, you know, one screen per eye and these sensors that allow for the positional tracking if you're doing 6 degree of freedom, three-dimensional virtual reality. So basically, if you're able to walk around like in a 3D video game. There's also, you know, the ability to plug in headphones and to have the sound component. But essentially, we're talking 2 screens and positional tracking sensors as being the sort of foundational hardware that creates the VR headset as we know it today. And with the most recent Oculus Quest release, as well as the first Oculus Quest, what is evolving and the way that the hardware is evolving has really most to do with how this tracking happens. So with the HTC Vive or the original Oculus headset, really you had this, what is it? I always get it flipped. So there's outside in and inside out tracking. So basically, with a headset like the Vive, the tracking is made possible by external boxes, these HTC Vive lighthouses. But nowadays, the trajectory of the hardware and the technology is that the tracking all happens from within the goggles themselves. So if you look at these Oculus 2 VR goggles, you can see the little black dots on the periphery of the goggles, and that provides the tracking. so that the headset knows where it is in 3D space because of the hardware that's built exclusively inside the goggles. And so, in other words, the hardware is getting more compact, it's getting easier to use. You don't even need, with the Quest series, you don't even need a computer. Like I have a gaming laptop to power my HTC Vive, but the direction this is all going is that all of the hardware will live inside the goggles, which is great, despite some of the ways that Facebook handles their the software side of things. The one downside, I am an HTC VR user. I don't even have an Oculus headset. I really am opposed to the way that Facebook, such as with the Oculus Quest 2, they require you to have a Facebook account. And there's some people have been having issues where they're not even allowed to, if they create a new Facebook account, they're not even able to access the goggles because that account doesn't have a sort of a, I don't know, because it's a new account, it's sort of suspicious. So there's some weird stuff happening in the Facebook and Oculus ecosystem, which I think is worth mentioning if you get further into VR. So really it's HTC and Oculus, Facebook as the primary pushers of the VR headset. But I wanted to show this because despite all the sensors and the sort of technology that has advanced since, you know, the 1850s when the stereograph came out, really there's the same sort of opportunity is sort of created by simply having the goggles designed as they are, which is you put your face inside of these and it cuts off the world around you. And that is what VR is about. It's about escaping, whether it's a deliberate escape or not. It's about cutting off the world in which you are sitting or standing, and you become immersed in this space, in this world that is provided to you inside of the goggles. And so that isolation, I think, is really important to consider. You know, why do you want to cut off the, you know, your user, your audience from where they are? And I say that thinking at the same time about augmented reality. And so in a way, virtual reality and augmented reality they're very much, there's significant overlap in terms of how you produce content for VR and augmented reality for AR. But really the difference is then, and it should be quite intentional, it's, you know, for AR, it's about augmenting the space where you actually are. And VR does the exact opposite of that. And so when I work with these mediums, you know, that element of what's the relationship that the user, that the audience should have with the space where they're in? Should they have any relationship? And so when we talk about VR, I think that's one of the most important questions to always ask if you're producing a story, if you're producing content for VR, is why are we cutting people off? And there should be, you know, you should have reasons as to why that kind of isolation is desired to tell that story. Like I mentioned a little bit ago, there is the 6 degrees of freedom, and then there's the 3 the 3 degrees of freedom. And so basically, and I suppose this debate is sort of ongoing, but what is VR in terms of, you know, is a VR experience just a 360 video? Does that count? Or does a VR experience need to be, does it need to be a sort of full 3D experience where you can actually walk about and, you know, sit down or lay down or walk around in the VR scene? And to me, that it's not a debate that I really care to get into, because I'm more interested in the affordances of both ways of making VR, or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter to me. But the technical implications are definitely worth considering, given hardware requirements. You know, access is a huge thing with VR, a huge limitation. And so this is something to consider, and we'll sort of get into this more in a little bit. For now, this is where I began. Quick question is, is everybody seeing, with my presentation here, are you seeing my, because I'm with PowerPoint, are you seeing my next slide, or are you just seeing seeing one slide at a time?
One slide, sir.
One slide, okay. Perfect. All right. So anyway, like I was saying, with emerging tech, and this is all kind of significantly outdated at this point, but I like to show it because I think it shows where this technology begins and sort of how it always starts when you work with an emerging media platform. So this was the first 360 camera that I worked with, and it was 2 GoPros that were kind of taped together, and they had rubber bands. And it shows that, you know, and it actually worked. I could shoot 360 video with this as a sort of proof of concept. And I like to show this because it does show, and this I made when I was at BuzzFeed in their media R&D lab. It shows that you can, you know, hack stuff together and make it work to prove a concept. And a lot of times when you're doing this kind of emerging media work, there's not a lot of examples, and there's a lot of exploration that has to be done. And the best way to do that is to make it quickly and cheaply to try out what you're trying to do, whether it's in software or hardware. And so taking this approach of kind of throwing stuff together and seeing if it works good enough is always the way to go. And that'll always evolve into something more refined, of course, but you know, when you're doing emerging media, in this case immersive media work, even now there's a lot of hacking together of software and hardware too. So a few years ago I got into the 360 space because I was interested in attaching them to drones. And at the time, the hardware that was available, the cameras were not nearly what they are today in terms of the quality that they can produce. So I could get better video quality from 2 GoPro cameras than an off-the-shelf Ricoh Theta, which is similar to the Insta360 cameras, if you're familiar with them, that are available today. But you know, 5 years ago, the camera quality was just significantly lower. So I was modifying slightly drones and 3D printing camera mounts. And this is some of what I was doing at BuzzFeed. Again, iterating on the idea, trying to make it better. And so, you know, with 360, the idea is that you can, you know, remove the videographer or the camera operator, and you can have this completely immersive visual experience. And so in this case, I wanted to put the camera onto a drone because I wanted to be able to access spaces, because I was interested in this concept, you know, spatial storytelling. How do we present spaces visually? And drones are great at doing that, but I wasn't necessarily even interested in high altitude videography. So I was interested in how could we use a drone to really access a space that a human couldn't necessarily go safely. And there was a massive forest fire north of San Francisco. And so we used the drone to fly and tell the story. But like in these shots here, you know, we're flying really low to the ground, but we're going places where, you know, we're kind of getting into the middle of the aftermath and the damage, and using the drone as a vehicle to access these spaces where really you would otherwise need a hazardous materials suit to go, if at all, because of the sort of the danger involved. That's in Spanish. So this 360 video that we did, it was one of the first productions on Facebook, and it got over 6 million views 5 years ago. We did other 360 stories too, playing with the medium, and this was at BuzzFeed in the what was the lab? It was the BuzzFeed Open Lab. That's right, it was the BuzzFeed Open Lab. And so we were interested in how could we use 360 video. And this was unbelievably, it's unbelievable to think about now, but this was at a Donald Trump rally in San Jose. And one of the BuzzFeed reporters, or actually one of the BuzzFeed Open Lab fellows who I was working with, he went to the rally and took a 360 camera and went into the rally to capture it. And that turned out to be it was a really captivating piece because of the level of immersion that you could get walking through the crowd with him as he carried the camera above his head. So the 360 stuff, again, continuing to sort of ask, what could we do with it? At the time when I was in California, there was a big wave surfing competition at the Maverick Surf Break. So it's kind of a world famous surf spot. If you're into or even just aware of surfing, it's pretty legendary around the world because the waves are the size of buildings. And at the time, I had been working with 360 and the surf competition happened. And so I thought it would be interesting to get these cameras onto a big wave surfer to get a sense of what is it like to be in a wave like that. And so again, more iteration, more experimentation with 360 camera placement and where does a 360 camera go? How do you capture it? Getting the cameras off of tripods, in this case, putting them on a surfer's head. And so we did that and got them onto a surfer. No big wave surfing, but we did some experiments with this water-friendly 360 camera rig. And so this, and I think this is worth mentioning, this rig on the right with the helmet and the cameras, the way that it works is actually, I'll show this slide first because I have a video clip of this. So the idea was that with this helmet, you could basically remove the person's head, whoever's wearing the helmet, and as a result, you get a shot that looks like this. I'm going to pull up a video here. Okay, does everybody see the video?
Yes, sir.
Perfect, okay, just wanted to check. Okay, so we had a dancer in Chicago wear the helmet, a ballet dancer, and so this is just a test shot, but I like it because one, you actually would not want to watch this in a VR headset. I think it would probably be, it might make you kind of sick, but what's happening here is so you can see sort of his shoulders, but his head's gone. So, but you can see his arms. And so the idea was we were playing with, you know, if you take a 360 camera off of a tripod, put it on somebody's head, then you can have a kind of embodied experience where you become, you kind of become the person wearing the helmet camera. Hopefully that came across here in my screen share, since this is a video. I bet there was a lot of lag, but and so this idea of, this was what BuzzFeed, of all the work that I did, this helmet was what the BuzzFeed team kind of was most excited about because of that ability to sort of have a sort of embodied experience, to have the ability to tell a story from a person's point of view where they actually wear the cameras and you can kind of experience what they experience. And I think that there's still a lot of potential for that in the 360 space. So don't just put a camera on a tripod, but, you know, put it on somebody's body and have them go through an experience, have them do something and capture it from their perspective. So again, continuing with the drone exploration. So in this video here, in this screen recording, so the problem, maybe you didn't notice it, when we did the fire shoot, when we shot the 360 video of the fire, you could see the drone. It's a simple technical thing, but you could see the drone if you looked up in the video. So obviously the next progression and exploration in 360 and drone 360 specifically was to actually be able to remove the drone. And so we were able to do that by having the drone positioned in between the two cameras. Basically the drone goes away. And it creates a really dynamic, you know, camera platform, because now you have this drone, you can fly it around, the drone disappears from the shot. And so you can do moving shots, you can, there's just a lot of flexibility that you can do. And I think it adds a lot of sort of immersion, because you're now able to move around and you have this platform that can easily do that with the drone. And I use that to do, this is kind of where I began to get out of actually doing projects just in the journalism context. So I worked with the journalism class at USC Annenberg, and we did a project using this drone technique. And so this was an environmental story. And of course, an environmental story is great for the 360 medium because it's all about the space. Okay, so with the 360 drone, we were able to do shots like this where, you know, I was out flying the drone and you can capture the entire environment from the air. And there's a lot of creative potential, like I was saying, with this kind of platform, as opposed to, or to complement rather, you know, your sort of standard tripod based shots. So the drone is a great tool to attach 360 cameras to. Again, just to kind of emphasize another project, which is, this is not done in the journalism context. This was a project that I did with, well, Second Muse, as well as Australian Aid. So this was more of a social impact development storytelling project about women seaweed growers in Tanzania. And so there was a strong environmental component to this. And so again, the 360 medium really made sense because the environment was part of the story. And what better way to capture that than in 360? And so the drone made an appearance. Let's see. So we did underwater shooting too, which is kind of fun. And then, yeah, then we had the drone. So right now, so this is still 3 dimensions, 3 dimension. See, I already forget the acronym. 3DOF VR, 360 video, 3 degrees of freedom. There we go. There's of course the sound component. So far I've just been talking about video and how do you capture 360 and how do you sort of hack your way around that. There's of course sound, and so the sort of sound equivalent of 360 video would be spatial audio, ambisonic audio, and there are great tools that are free to use to do work in the audio space of this. So Reaper is a digital audio workstation, a DAW, and you can use it for free. And then there are spatial audio plugins that are available for free as well. Facebook has their spatial audio workstation. So what this allows you to do is, even if you don't have a Zoom recorder like the H2N, the spatial audio workstation allows you to take audio. It could be something even that you made with your phone, and it allows you to position it in space. If it is just a mono or a stereo recording. And so you can do positional audio, or you can do spatial audio if you have ambisonic audio. And I'm not going to go too much into this other than to say, I really like working with audio, and I think that in many cases, the audio component of 360 has kind of lagged behind the video. So these are the tools you can use. If you're interested in audio, I recommend working with them. And there's a lot of potential for creative exploration around spatial audio storytelling. And people now in the immersive media space are starting to think more about this concept of actually removing the video or the visual component and just having audio and having spatial audio and having immersive audio. And so there's beginning to be more experimentation and thinking about that. Unfortunately, the tools in some ways are actually cheaper and more accessible than on the video side. So Reaper's great. The Facebook 360 Spatial Workstation's great. I recommend checking them out if you're interested in audio. To kind of conclude on the 360 video component, when I think about why to use it, when to use it, it's really when there's a spatial context that's important to the story. And if placing the viewer into that context, into that space is important. And also if that juxtaposition of objects and people and structures is important, because you can move around, you can look up and down and all around. And so if being able to do that and being able to show objects and people in an environment or juxtaposed against other, whatever objects is important to the story, then the medium is really useful. So now kind of getting into the photogrammetry stuff, basically the reason that I got into photogrammetry, which then feeds back into VR, is through working with archaeologists and helping them solve their sort of problems working in the field. And so most summers, with the exception of this past summer because of the pandemic, I go to Turkey and I work with an archaeological excavation, excavating a Roman city, an ancient Roman city, 2,000 years old. And so with a drone, which is what I use most of the time, given the large scale of what they are excavating, I can capture aerial photos like this, which save them a lot of, struggles from back before the use of drones, when they were using fire trucks to get people up high in the air. So drones are extremely handy to have on hand. And again, the process of photogrammetry, which has become a sort of, it's an important tool for immersive media and VR production. Again, it's been around since the 1850s, and it's sort of lived in different, it's had different kinds of applications in a way, but it all kind of comes together in the sense that it was really originally designed for map making, and it's still used for making maps. So like if you look at Google Earth imagery, the way that photogrammetric images are captured and processed is basically used to create the maps that we're familiar with and that we use on a regular basis. So again, there's a lot of historical precedence for this technology and this technique. And it basically comes down to the capture of images. It comes down to capturing images and processing them to remove perspective, which probably doesn't make any sense, but that's what it that's how the process works, especially in the context of map making. It's sort of, or satellite imagery type map making. So the way that we use it and the way that it'll make the most sense probably to you and to the way that makes the most sense to me is in this sort of three-dimensional visual context. So it used to be that you would fly a plane over a landscape and you'd be able to produce, or a hot air balloon, and you'd be able to produce sort of satellite imagery type maps, of course, from airplanes. But now we can use drones to do this. And so in practice, this is what photogrammetry looks like as a visualization. So in this case, I'm using that archaeological excavation as an example. And this is a screenshot from Agisoft Photoscan, now called Agisoft Metashape, but this is photogrammetry software. So if you take your photogrammetry images and you process them, what you get is what you see here. You have a 3D model. In this case, it's a point cloud, so the quality looks real low, but that's kind of by design. Anyway, each of these blue squares is a photograph in three-dimensional space, and it all contributes to the 3D model that we see here. And as another example, if you have an object, this is a marble head. It's about the size of like a basketball, or you could hold this in your hands, in both of your hands. And again, each blue square is a photograph in 3D space. So basically what's happening is I'm taking a bunch of photographs with a lot of overlap, and then when I process them in software, you get a 3D model in the end. So literally you can take anything, well, there are limitations. You can take three-dimensional objects and you can reconstruct them for immersive media platforms. And so it's an extremely powerful tool to bring reality into virtual reality or augmented reality. Hence why it's a very important tool for immersive media. And again, so this is the first drone that I would use for doing photogrammetry. And so again, it was a sort of hacked together tool. It's now obsolete because of what you can just buy. But again, I think it's worth showing that you can actually sort of hack together your tools to produce content that's really cutting edge. So I made this 6 years ago and would travel. I took it to Turkey and I took it to Kenya and did projects with it. So it's a very simple sort of hacked together build using an old Canon camera and a water bottle cap and some hardware pieces to attach the camera to the drone. So it's simple and it did the job. Of course, now you can just buy a DJI drone that has a camera built in and it does the job better, but that initial drone did do the job. And so what we're talking about here is like this, where you can go from, you can go from a video to a photorealistic 3D model of something. Archaeologists have been using this technology for years and years and really are sort of, for me, they were a source of inspiration as to how journalists could actually use photogrammetry. And when I was learning about the process, I learned from archaeologists how to use the technology. And then I then applied it in the journalism context and wrote a paper about it 6 years ago with my mentor, Matt Waite. And, at the time, almost nobody was doing this kind of work in the sort of journalism and media space. And so when I talked at the very beginning of the presentation about interdisciplinary work and interdisciplinary learning, that is it in practice. I work with archaeologists. I learned a new technique, a new set of tools, and literally brought it into the journalism space. And here's a temple site excavation from that excavation in Turkey. And Sketchfab is a great tool to publish your work. It's a great tool to find other photogrammetric examples. It's also a great way you can publish stories this way, as has been done. There's a couple instances of this where you can use Sketchfab kind of like a YouTube video where you can share, you can embed as an iframe your 3D content. You can also apply audio samples or audio files to your 3D model. And so you can have a sort of self-guided 3D with audio tour. Let's see. What is the, yeah, Sketchfab, okay. But specifically in virtual reality, so that same model that I just showed in Sketchfab, this is that same model in a VR, in virtual reality, right? So, and again, so here's another model of the mosaic, again, in a VR headset. So the idea here really is that if you're doing photogrammetry, say, you can take these models and you can use them in different ways. So the 3D model that you produce can be used in a VR headset. It can be published on Sketchfab. It can be used in an augmented reality experience. There's so much that you can do with it, and it all kind of stems out of photogrammetry. And so that is why it's an extremely useful tool. If you want to capture the real world, bring it into an immersive media platform, photogrammetry is what you will do. And to make this content, one of the ways you can create a VR experience like what I just showed you. So in this video, somebody's wearing an HTC Vive and walking around the site, walking around the photogrammetry model. It was a very basic Unity build. So again, interdisciplinary work, we're using 3D gaming engines now, to build these experiences. And we have now been doing this for years, but we're using technology that wasn't designed for journalism or media, in the way that we might talk about it, but it's useful to us. And as content creators, this is how you make an immersive media production. You use a game engine. Again, maybe, let's see. Okay, this video. It's on its side. So I'll just pause it here. So basically, in this video, which doesn't work very well, this is a photogrammetric model that is it's a basic AR projection. So again, going from VR headset, augmented reality, in this case, a tablet AR projection, Sketchfab. There's so much that you can do with this process and what you produce with photogrammetry that it's endless how you can sort of make these emerging technology tools work together. So this is a tool set that I might take to the field, a couple drones, 360 drone. I've got my, I use a Lumix Micro Four Thirds camera for doing my photogrammetry work. And with this tool set, I can produce different kinds of immersive media. So a specific application of photogrammetry that I did in Kenya is there was a story that I worked on about this landfill, the Dandora dump. And so I was hired to do aerial video for a short documentary about the landfill. And because of the nature of the landfill, it's a giant space, it struck me that this would be a great opportunity to use the photogrammetry process, because with the video, you can watch the video, you press play, but you don't really have any control beyond that. And so with a 3D model of the landfill, we could sort of point things out in the landfill and allow people to explore it, again, using Sketchfab in this case. But we could let people explore the landfill instead of just watching a video that has been prepared in advance. And so this was an early photogrammetric sort of storytelling experiment, if you will, using Sketchfab. Another way that people have used drones and photogrammetry is in the context of Google Earth. So, Google Earth has satellite imagery, but it's limited in terms of resolution and the quality of that imagery. So when you produce your drone captured photogrammetric assets, assuming you're using a modern drone, it will capture GPS data along with those images, which then basically means that that data gets packed into the photogrammetric model, and you can actually export those models with the GPS data so that you can basically overlay them into Google Earth. So if you're using Earth Studio or Earth Pro, you can take your photogrammetric assets, bring them into Google Earth, and then if you're doing, this is another application for that same photogrammetric asset. Forget VR and AR and Sketchfab. If you want to use Google Earth to produce a video fly-through, you can actually do that with your photogrammetric asset. And of course, what you can do, or what it allows you to sort of, it has the bonus of having that additional satellite imagery. And so obviously with your drone, I'm not going to fly over the entirety of Nairobi. I just flew over the landfill, but here you can sort of juxtapose and have your photogrammetric asset along with the rest of what Google Earth has. So you can focus on a specific area, capture that in high resolution with your drone, and then you can still have, sort of for context, the surrounding areas. And so this is one way that you can sort of add to what Google Earth provides if you want to focus on a specific area and you have the ability to fly it with a drone. There's also a sort of data journalism, very basic element as well, where when you do a photogrammetric scan, you can sort of do basic data journalism with it, where you can capture the volume of the area. So like it's a landfill, there's trash. So we can get a sort of rough estimate of the volume of trash that's here because we have a three-dimensional scan of the landfill. So there's that as well. Sketchfab, it's extremely flexible, kind of going back to Sketchfab. So you can drop it into Facebook, mobile device friendly. You can drop it as an iframe into different platforms. So just another example of an object. This was only produced from 16 photographs. It's a mummified head. And this is part of a BuzzFeed. It was connected to a BuzzFeed story about Jeremy Bentham, the philosopher's severed head that's been mummified. So if you have a story that involves an object, photogrammetry can be a great tool to use to help tell that story, because you can capture it in 3D, even if it doesn't go into VR or AR. Here I'm actually working with a museum. This is a custom rig. If you get real into the technology, I don't know if any of you are photographers and use a ring flash, but a ring flash is a great tool to help provide enough light, because when you do photogrammetry, shadows are a problem. Shadows are sort of an enemy that you need to do away with. And so lighting is always a challenge. I like to use a ring flash. I've also come up with some techniques around using plexiglass to be able to capture the undersides of objects. Because when you do photogrammetry, the most important thing to remember is that the object cannot move. It must remain static at all times during the process. If you move an object, if an object moves on you, the process, the software will basically fail in its attempt to reconstruct the object. So I've come up with ways to, if you want to capture what's underneath an object, instead of placing it on a table, I place it on plexiglass because it's clear and I can see underneath it. So this was working with a museum to capture part of their collection for a virtual reality project that involved pieces from their collection. So I do work like this as well. some other examples of photogrammetry and sort of immersive media applications. So Time did a project that's notable where they used photogrammetry to capture parts of the Amazon, and they created an augmented reality experience. And they embedded within that experience other media assets, such as photographs and audio samples and video files. So basically, the photogrammetry model of the rainforest becomes a sort of container for other media assets to also live. And then they packaged it all into a mobile device AR experience. Another notable forward-thinking virtual reality piece in this case was After Solitary by Emblematic Group and Frontline. And here they used photogrammetry for static three-dimensional capture. So they basically captured this prison cell. And then they captured, in this case, the individual that the story was about. They captured him using volumetric video capture, basically. So you can kind of see his hat distorting a bit. So he's in 3D. It's time-based media. And he was then placed in the VR experience into the 3D reconstruction, the photogrammetric 3D reconstruction of his prison cell. And so volumetric video is how you would capture time-based three-dimensional media for immersive media platforms. The way that you do that is, like I said, with photogrammetry, the object, your subject, must remain perfectly static. It cannot move. If you want to capture movement, you need a completely different tool set. DepthKit is an example of a software tool that's used for that, and it uses the Microsoft Kinect cameras, as well as, well, they prefer you use the Microsoft Kinect cameras. But basically, it allows you to capture depth. It allows you to capture 3D, time-based visual media. And there are other ways that this process can happen. Microsoft has an extraordinarily expensive to use Capture Studio or Capture Studios. I've also been working on a lower cost, again, with historical precedence in a way, capture solutions. So I'm all about taking cameras into the field. And so if we look back in time to the Kodak Brownie, you know, the challenge with volumetric video at this point is that it's cumbersome and difficult to use in the field. You either need a capture studio, which you can't really travel with because it can involve hundreds of cameras. DepthKit also involves taking a laptop, and it's not so field friendly. So I've been working on what I'm calling the volume box, and you can see them here in this image. So these little lunchbox size boxes, and they allow you to capture volumetric video in the field without, you know, a laptop and a camera that's on a tripod and a USB cable that's dangling somewhere. So the idea is, how can we make volumetric video field friendly? And of course, the output is an immersive media medium. It could be VR, it could be AR. But the idea is, again, to get away from the studio, kind of like early photography, is to get out of the studio and to make volumetric video capture portable, like the Kodak Brownie did 120 years ago for photography. And so, yeah, the volume box involves a tiny computer, a drone battery, and a little flat screen. And it uses, again, interdisciplinary inspiration. We're using robotics cameras, basically, which have the ability to capture depth. So they can see in 3D, and they also have a color camera. So we're using technology from the robotics industry to push volumetric video capture forward, to make it cheaper, to make it more accessible, and to make it field friendly. And so what does this mean? Okay, so to show what you can kind of do with this, so let's say you have a photogrammetric model. In this case, we have our basketball court here. So me and my collaborators, we did this shoot on this basketball court with these guys playing basketball. Well, with photogrammetry, we can have the court, but everything is static. And so if we wanted to add the basketball players, then we need our volumetric cameras, which is what the cameras were doing here, capturing the players in action. And so what we can actually do is sort of take photogrammetry to another level once we have volumetric video capture. And it's very rough right now. But here we have a photogrammetric model of the court, and then we have the basketball players captured volumetrically playing on the court using that volumetric camera, volumetric video camera. So that's a way that I'm right now, or that's one of the projects that I've sort of been working on an ongoing basis, developing that. If you're interested in audio, and if you happen to have the AirPod Pros, there's a new toolkit that I recommend checking out. So with the AirPods, you can, here it is. You can now do positional tracking and sort of augmented reality audio projects with the AirPod Pros and the motion data that they capture. So again, this is this is very new, kind of cutting edge in the sense that you weren't able to do this before very easily. You can do spatial audio storytelling now with the AirPod Pros in a way that was not at all easy to do before. And that's made possible by the sensors. So kind of like with VR headsets, you know, it's all about the sensors that are in the hardware. And so there's A-Frame, if you're familiar, if you work with JavaScript, WebVR, WebXR, A-Frame is it's a library for doing this kind of immersive media in the browser. And so there's now, you can even use your AirPods with A-Frame. There's an SDK available, and there's an A-Frame build of it. So if you work with A-Frame, this is something to definitely check out. Let's see. I wanted to show this too, just to kind of wrap up and show that, you know, VR is a medium, but it's not just for telling stories in the way that you might think of them. And by that I mean, there's this whole field now of virtual production and using, it's kind of like VR green screening, where people are actually using VR technology to capture camera movements in a virtual environment. And so, in other words, the output in this case isn't even a VR experience. They're actually using VR to produce 2D video that was captured inside of a virtual environment, if that makes sense. And so again, VR is just a tool, and the hardware involved in virtual reality isn't necessarily even the end point of what you're going for. You might just be using it as a sort of intermediary tool, such as the case with virtual production, where the VR sensors are actually tracking camera movements to control a virtual 2D fixed frame camera in a VR experience, if you can wrap your mind around that. There's a whole lot of information now about this field, and a lot of people are working again with the Unreal Engine. So they're working with a gaming engine to produce virtual fixed frame video productions using VR. VR is being used to teach welding. This is one of the greatest examples, I think, of VR, because it's a very concrete example of VR to teach a skill. You have an audience, you know, if you go into the headset, you're going in to learn how to weld. And I think the biggest challenge of VR in the media space is your audience, because people don't have VR headsets. Very few people do. And so if you're creating VR specifically, this should be sort of your number one question, is how's anybody going to be able to access this content? There's a lot of VR gaming, which I'll gloss over. there is a study, if you're interested in the broader media space and immersive media, I would check out this. I'll put it in the chat. There was a great study done by a journalist about the state of immersive media. He talked to a lot of people around the world about what people are working on, and it's very nuanced. It's not necessarily, there's some despondency. People have shifted out of 360 video and VR and gotten more into augmented reality these days, and he kind of talks about that, and he interviews people and they talk about that, sort of the transition from one technology to another, which is not to say that VR is fading away at all, or going away. In fact, I think it's living now more than ever before. It's just that issue of the audience and the fact that people don't have VR headsets for the most part. And if you're producing journalism content specifically and your audience doesn't have a VR headset, how does that work? Do they just use their phone? Yes, to a point, but that doesn't really provide the audience with the kind of experience that you want them to have, hence why you would use VR in the first place. And so I recommend this report because I think it kind of gets into those challenges and those realities around virtual reality in the journalism specific sort of context. I will share one last thing because I think it sort of addresses that to a point, and that is this duck. So this rubber duck belongs to Mozilla Hubs, and if you're not familiar with Hubs, I recommend you check it out. Hubs.mozilla. Mozilla Hubs is, and I'll pull up a room here. It's a browser-based immersive media platform, you could say. It's designed for synchronous sort of social experiences. You pull it up in the browser. You can use it on mobile devices, computers, VR headsets. It's
Did we lose him?
another room. So this is a Mozilla Hubs room using the world builder called Spoke, which is part of Mozilla Hubs. And so you can bring in 3D photogrammetric assets. You can bring in videos. With the Online News Association, we actually had an event in here back in July. So people hold conferences, immersive conferences in Hubs, which is especially kind of useful now during the pandemic. It's a place for people to come together in a virtual environment. And if you have VR, you can use it. You can use your Oculus headset, your HTC headset. And it's free, and it's really quite amazing. And it's also kind of basic at the same time in a good way, in the sense that it's pretty easy to use and it's easy to build worlds with using the Spoke platform, which if you've done any work in, say, Unity or Unreal, again, it's kind of like one of those platforms in terms of the way that it allows you to bring in 3D objects or any kind of media asset and place them in a space. So here's a room build here's a Mozilla Hubs room build. So I've got it's basically a theater, and I've got a video file here on the wall, and so I think that's where I'll end this talking.
Yeah, questions please, and just one question. Can I start? Ben, display land,
Yeah.
please. How do we use for this display land for reporting?
Displayland doesn't exist anymore.
How damn.
They shut down in August.
Okay.
Sadly, it was a great platform while it lived.
So what I should be trying is metaverse, right?
Um, I would. If
Yeah.
people are using Macs, that's really your only option. Metashape.
Metashape, right? Okay. Yeah. Guys, ask. So with you.
Sir, this is Niladri here. Sir, I had a question about storage. If we have independent video production and VR materials are a bit data heavy. I mean, an hour of coverage takes up around 7 to 8 gigabytes of data or terabytes of data. So if we are on field or on site reporting something and we want to cover up VR material, so what are the storage options we have? Is it AWS or local storage or something else?
So, wait, are you talking about 360 video?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, you're talking gigabytes. If you have, I just have external hard drives, you know. In my cameras, I've got, somewhere here, I've got a Insta360 camera. I don't know what you're using, but what camera are you using?
Sir, I don't actually produce 360. I'm asking for storage options so that in the future when I produce things, the storage
Okay.
constraints are not there.
Yeah, I mean, in the camera, I use a big SD card. I use a 128 GB SD card, and then I store it all on my external drive. So I've got like 2 terabyte drives, 3 terabyte drives, but it's not that unreasonable. You don't need AWS, you don't need the cloud, maybe for backing up, but I mean, if you're able to get multi-terabyte drives, like I would say I have a stack of 3 terabyte hard drives and I have a lot of projects spread across them. So it's a lot of space, but I think it's totally, unless you're using a camera like an Insta360 Pro that has 6 SD cards, each producing gigabytes like that, then yeah, you run out of storage faster, but it's not really an issue, I don't think.
Right, sir. Thank you.
So I had a question. So you spoke about photogrammetry and how is it possible for us to use that to sort of quantify the effects of climate change and actually help report on it, since so many governments are kind of against even accepting that, you know, climate change is a reality. So how would you suggest we use this technology when we're, you know, reporting on the effects of climate
Sure.
change and actually studying it?
I'll give you an example. If you want to quantify change, one way that you could do it would be and I've seen this done, basically you could capture an environment. So for example, there was, in the US, we have the National Geological Survey, it's an office that does, among many things, they will sort of, they'll track changes in, say, a river. So a river over time will change course, right? Because that's what rivers do. They erode the area around the river. So it's not climate change, but you could extrapolate. I watched a team of surveyors. They used a drone to capture a riverbed, which had sandbars. So it was a very shallow river. They were interested in capturing the movement of the sand over time. I mean, a very, you know, research intensive, might not be interesting to us, but they wanted to see, how do the sandbars change over time, which is basically erosion in a form. and they used a drone to capture the river and the sandbars. And so what you could do is you could capture erosion. Like if you go to a coastline, California is a good example of this. The coastline is eroding, and there's a place near San Francisco. My drone video, I didn't point this out, but in the drone aerial 360 video, I was flying over a cliff over the Pacific Ocean in California. The cliff side was eroding, and there were houses along that cliff that were basically falling into the ocean. And so that has been an ongoing story for years, is these houses are right along the side of the cliff of the Pacific. The cliff is disappearing. The houses are, you can't live in these houses anymore because it's too dangerous. So one way that you could use a drone in that context, and you could even get quantifiable data, is if you were to go to that cliffside over time and capture it photogrammetrically, you could literally 3D model the cliff as it's eroding. And that would be one way that you could use photogrammetry, not only for the visuals, but you could actually, because of the you could sort of track the volume, and by volume I mean like the volume of soil, of dirt as it leaves the cliff. And so you could do time-based photogrammetric captures of an environment, capturing the change over time. And that is what people do in the sciences. That's one way that photogrammetry is already used. It's just that it could be used with a sort of journalistic output too, if you were ambitious and had the ability to, to do that.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question, which is, how do you think we could recreate past events in VR or AR in current time? Like if,
Yes.
for example, we are exploring a certain space where a certain very significant event had occurred, and we could recreate that or go back to that. So how do you think we could achieve that technology?
So if you had, I mean, the most logical way I could think of would be if you had pictures, let's say you had photographs of the space as it was, or you could create it based on your understanding, your imagination of the space, but you use a 3D design program, and you could use, and it could be quite basic perhaps, as in you could use perhaps software like SketchUp, or if you're more, if you have, or Maya, basically use 3D design software. And what you do is you create the space in 3D. And then once you have that, kind of like with the photogrammetric asset, it's a 3D model. What do you want to do with it? Do you want to take it into Unity and create a VR experience? Do you want to create an augmented reality experience? Do you want to bring it into Mozilla Hubs and have a browser-based VR experience? So yeah, you use 3D design software, create the space, and then decide where you want to take it. And there's a lot that you can do with that.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so have you worked in any projects that have used VR for conflict resolution?
Oh man, that is a really good question. The answer is kind of. I was approached about just such a project, and it never actually happened. It was actually in the Syrian context. There was an organization that does conflict resolution, and they were interested in that. And they said, could we do this? How would we do it? What I'll say is that we kind of came up with more questions than answers, and because we didn't actually do anything. But what we did talk about, which I sort of think is sort of the most important takeaway, is why use VR? Like what is it about immersive media that would make it make sense in that context? And the answer was, we think it was that kind of, like I was saying, when you put on the VR goggles, you cut out the world around you. So you focus. You can, you know, if you're talking to somebody, you know, like right now I'm in my room, but I've got stuff all around me, and I'm not as focused as I would be if I was in the room, if we were all in the same room together, if we were all in VR, if I was in VR, it would be a different experience because I would cut out where I am and I would just be focusing on, in some ways, on you and everybody else in this call. And so there's that element of sort of isolation and focus. But there's also, you know, like a phone call or a Zoom call. Mozilla Hubs, say as an alternative to Zoom, is, if you haven't used Hubs, have you guys used Hubs?
No, we do it only in Jan. After
Okay,
Jan.
great. So when you use Hubs, you'll see it as an alternative to say a Zoom call. And what's great about it is that you all inhabit an avatar and you're
Yeah.
all together in a 3D space.
Yeah.
And in the
Like Alt
conflict,
VR, like Alt
yeah,
VR.
like Alt VR, but easier to access because Alt VR, you know, I mean, Mozilla Hubs is, you can use anything to
Yeah.
access it. Anyway, but so that was the other element of the conflict resolution, was when you're engaging in conflict resolution face to face, you're together in that space. And if you're remote and you're cut off from one another, that kind of separation isn't helpful. It can detract from the process. And so we had actually talked about using Mozilla Hubs as a way to facilitate conflict resolution, because people can come together in a shared space, inhabiting avatars, and you'll see when you try it. It's great for conferences, because for remote conferences, because it does allow people to inhabit a shared space and to have hallway conversations. And even though everybody is still technically remote, it's more personal than a Zoom call because you are sort of together in a way that we're not. And you're together because you're in a shared 3D environment. And that's how humans live in the world, is we live in a 3D world and we engage with each other in a 3D world, which is why being in person is, I would say, better than being remote, especially on a Zoom call.
Do you mind sharing your email ID? I actually want to work on VR and conflict resolution for my dissertation.
Yeah. I
Thank you
can
so much.
send you, I have a
The presentation, Ben, can you just share the presentation with us so that I can share with the students?
I don't have a presentation about the conflict resolution.
No. The presentation you did.
Oh yeah, I can do that. But I was gonna say, I have a white paper about this conflict resolution project, which I can, yeah. So
Yeah,
Siyashi, I can send you that.
yeah. I'm really interested because like there's this one project, it's called Project Dastan. So it's basically what they do is, there's like, you know, there's a conflict between India and Pakistan and they don't allow people to go the other way. So what they are attempting to do is try to take people who were originally from India and originally from Pakistan using VR and try to like take them back to their own countries.
Hmm.
So that's why that's something that really interests me.
Yeah. What's the name of that again?
It's Project Dastan. I'll just type it out.
Yeah, that's a great application. That's a great use of. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really interesting.
I'll drop you an email.
Okay.
The project, Ben, essentially, in other words, it just helps you to go back to the ancestral homes you left behind in Pakistan, and the Muslims who migrated from India. You get to live in, to go around and see in the homes you left behind.
Hmm.
I think it's created something like, because Nani created Gone Gitmo. just taking old pictures, black and white pictures and stuff, archival pictures, and recreated it.
I just shared the link for you to check out.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah. Okay, then I guess that's it. Ben, thank you so much. And could you email your presentation, this presentation to me, please, so I can share with them?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, some of them will just, you've got to bear with us. Some will get back to you with emails and stuff for more questions. So whenever you get time, please try to answer.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'm definitely interested, like Project Dastan. I'm really interested now in these kinds of, but if you have other projects that are taking place in the subcontinent, I'm really curious.
There's something I was telling them, because I am part of a thing, just we are trying to recreate the Dandi March, Gandhi walk to Gujarat, that salt march. Yeah. What if you can recreate it? Because there are archival videos, archival pictures. Then what if you get to walk with that, with Gandhi?
So actually, you know what? That reminds me of what you should look at. There was a project completely unrelated, but not necessarily so unrelated, where a guy in England used Google Maps or Google Earth Street View, and he created an experience where he would ride a recumbent bike and wear his VR goggles, and he would bike across England from street view image to street view image. You get what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is, if you're going to do that, why not, could you sort of weave in this contemporary element? I don't know if the street view imagery is there, but, maybe it is. But yeah, people travel in VR headsets using street view imagery. And I wonder if you could sort of weave that in somehow into what you're talking about, to sort of make it contemporary, but also historical. I gotta find that link. I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
That project.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been wonderful having you around. So when are you back in India next time?
After the pandemic, I'd like to, when the pandemic's over, I'd like to come back. I've got a 10-year visa, and I really want to use it and come back for a few months.
Yeah.
So I'd be back there now if it wasn't cold, if it wasn't like it is now, because it's getting cold here now in the US, but I'm locked down, so.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
No
It's been wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much.
No problem. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Bye, Sushi.
Bye, Chinmay.
Bye, bye.